We are picking through, and I'll say the wreckage because, boy, it wasn't pretty. The wreckage of joint practices with the Las Vegas Raiders styles and the disappointment that's come out surrounding the quarterback play of the Niners.
Yeah, and you can take it with a grain of salt. You can say, okay, it was just practice, but hey, there were a lot of people that were very excited from what they were seeing with the Niners when they were playing their own team. So I don't see how you can feel that way when they're just practicing against their own team, but now against a team with a different jersey on, an actual different team. Now it doesn't matter. So look, is it time to sound the red alert and alarm? No, but it's always nice when you're doing the conversation talking about how it doesn't matter, even though they played well. You still don't want to have the conversation. Right. Either way, you could say it doesn't matter, but it's nice to say, oh yeah, they balled out. It's just joint practice versus they didn't play well, but it's just joint practice.
Right. It's easier to say that when you don't play well, easier to dismiss it as, oh, it's just joint practice. But when your guys play well and you ball out, if you're the Raiders, you're saying, yeah, we look good against one of the favorites of the NFC.
Exactly. Get the ring.
You don't have to couch it in any way when you're the team that actually looked better.
Right. Joint practice bowl.
Yeah.
Champs.
Coming up at 4:15, George Contos going to join us here on 95.7 The Game. And at the top of the hour, I do want to pick your brain and talk a little bit about this Giants-Rangers series because I think it's a big series for one individual in particular. But first, Tommy in Mountain View wants to talk about Shanahan. What's going on, Tommy?
Hey, not much. Hey, I got to say this, man. But we're talking about practice.
Thank you.
We're talking about practice.
Not a game.
I'll never have another chance to say that again, but so I had to shoot my shot there.
It's all you've got.
With this thing with Shanahan, I have a problem with him being labeled as the offensive genius because we've been so spoiled in having, Bill Walsh and Seifert come through and do their thing at a legendary pace. And I'm thinking sometimes that we lose perspective on what that really means. And so when you compare the opportunity that Shanahan has had with quarterbacks and then what you had in the past, it's kind of hard to say that he's at the same level as those guys, especially Walsh. So, I understand Joe came from lineage, from Notre Dame, and he had some talent, but not what was expected and what you got afterwards. And for Shanahan to have so many opportunities with these different quarterbacks and still be in a conundrum to the point where he looked out. Mr. Irrelevant turned out to be a baller, but is it really because Shanahan developed him that way and he's a genius? Or was it just by need and figuring out what the strengths were for this kid to be able to read and react and get the ball down the field to be productive, right? Because if he can do that with him, then you have to question why he hasn't been able to do that with the others and why did the Jimmy G experiment up to a point fail? And I pointed back to him. I don't really look at him as a genius. That's my 2 cents worth, man.
Interesting. Thank you, Tommy. And it's always, to me, a curiosity in terms of how you look at any coach based on their personnel versus the coach when their personnel actually gets better. Right. So Kyle Shanahan takes over this team, and the roster was bereft of any real talent, and you lost your first 10 games. Then you traded for Jimmy Garoppolo. He came in, and he won the last 4 or 5, and you wound up with a decent year. Then Garoppolo gets the job, the roster gets better, and Shanahan starts to win games. So did Kyle Shanahan learn to coach overnight, or was the roster just better, and so the team started playing better as well?
Right. Well, number one, Kyle Shanahan, the idea of him being an offensive genius, that's not just a Bay Area thing. That's not a Bay Area media thing. That's not a Niner thing. I mean, all across the football world, all across the sports world, if you follow football, Kyle Shanahan is known as one of the top offensive coaches. That's just what it is. And number two, it really just depends on your definition of success, right? If your definition of success is multiple Super Bowls, then not only has Kyle Shanahan come up short, then basically every coach in the NFL has come up short besides the couple that do have rings right now. So when it comes to the definition of success, I think it would be very hard to say that Kyle Shanahan hasn't been successful because NFC championships year in, year out, he's been to a Super Bowl, hasn't been able to get it done, but he has still performed at a high level. And if Kyle Shanahan were to walk, he would get picked up off the street immediately. I don't even think he'd get to the street. He'd be walking down the stairs out of the Niners building before somebody picked them up. So I understand that you still want the big one. You want that parade. You want number 6. But Kyle Shanahan, compared to the rest of the NFL, it's still one of the elite coaches. And I don't really know if that's debatable. And when you look at how this roster looks right now, besides Christian McCaffrey, offensively and defensively, we can talk about the drafts and how they've missed, but look at all the guys that they have been able to draft, and they have been able to, produce. So I understand that you want the big one, but sometimes you got to take a step back. You got to put it in perspective, because if you look at Debo, Brandon Ayuk, and you put a collection of talent together so that, Jimmy G looked really good and Brock Purdy's looked really good, but that's from a roster that Kyle Shanahan has constructed, and he is calling the play. So it was very hard for me to say that Kyle Shanahan is overrated or not an offensive genius, whatever you want to call it.
If you did a coaching draft, if all 32 coaches became free agents right now, and all the teams had a chance to draft the head coaches, 32 through 1, Shanahan goes in the top 5.
Easy.
Maybe he's in the top 3.
Yeah.
You put him in the top 5 in terms of what he's done. I'm looking at the ranking styles, and we'll get into some Giants talk here in just a minute. But the Chip Kelly year, 2016, the Niners ranked 31st in offensive yards and 27th in offensive points. They were 2-14 that year. So Shanahan takes over largely the same team, and he gets Garoppolo toward the end of that season. They were 12th in yards, 20th in points, and since then, they've been in the top 10 in 3 of his subsequent 5 years in both yards and in points. So Shanahan, yes, your point is well taken. They've improved the roster dramatically, but also having Shanahan there has helped the offense become a completely different unit. And, put the quarterback aside, if you look at just the team this year, you've got multiple Hall of Famers on the offense. Trent Williams is a lock. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. Christian McCaffrey is on a Hall of Fame track. George Kittle, if he can play another 5 years or so, he might be in the conversation. Now, Fred Warren on the defensive side of the ball has been elite, and he might trend toward being in that group. Nick Bosa is on a track to be a Hall of Fame type player. So, yes, they've drafted and done well in many ways, and Kyle Shanahan has made a lot out of this team, 23-11 over the last 2 years, and all of this while searching for his franchise quarterback.
Well, that's the thing. If the big knock on Kyle Shanahan would be his decision-making. At that point in time, your decision to take Trey Lance, your decision to take a rookie QB. I mean, any of these guys, Mac Jones is supposed to be the safe pick. I don't know what this team looks like with Mac Jones, and you still have all these weapons. So his decision-making in terms of the big picture of, okay, do we need to keep all these weapons? Do we say no do we say yes to maybe having a lesser defense or less weapons on offense so we can afford to pay a franchise guy that should be able to make up for what we're missing? Kyle Shanahan has decided not to do that. And if you're gonna rag on him for that because that was his choice, and they do not have a Super Bowl yet, and they do have this that's the thing. Everybody says, oh my gosh, they have this Super Bowl ready roster, they can't get it done. Well, who was the mastermind behind the Super Bowl ready roster? Kyle Shanahan.
And John Lynch.
John Lynch. So Kyle Shanahan, and he makes it hum and he makes it go. If anything, it might be a little bit of Kyle Shanahan having too much on his plate. I've heard that conversation before. And maybe you should, jack of all trades, master of none. Maybe you should just focus on the coaching aspect instead of just having your hand in everything. But as of right now, he runs it along with John Lynch, and that's how it's going to be. And it's hard to argue their success, but every fan is going to make that argument if you don't have a parade.
Right.
Because we want a parade.
If you look at the history of Super Bowl winning coaches and you total up the individuals who have won a Super Bowl, I think that number's 34.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the very select few coaches in the history of the National Football League who've been able to win a Super Bowl. And you mentioned it before, 32 teams going into this year. And right now, all 32 are 0-0. 31 of those teams are not going to win the Super Bowl.
No.
So of the other 31 teams who don't win the Super Bowl, how many of those teams would be looking at a Super Bowl or bust sort of ideology among the fan base. Maybe 6 teams?
Right. Maybe.
You're talking about Kansas City and Buffalo, Cincinnati and Philadelphia, and the Niners and, Dallas, I suppose you could throw
Dallas
them in.
Is every year,
right,
I guess.
But they're good enough to where their fans can rightly say Super Bowl or bust.
Minnesota?
I doubt it.
Yeah.
Even the Jets I wouldn't throw in, although the Jets could be a very good team this year. They haven't been close enough to where I would look at them and say it's Super Bowl or bust. So for the other 26 teams who maybe or probably won't win the Super Bowl, what are their fans going to say? Are they going to try to run their coach if they go 11-6 and have a first round ouster in the postseason?
Right. And the comparison that we continue to see, continue to hear about, and we were talking about it during the break, Dibs, Andy Reid in Philadelphia. Everybody, Niners' favorite city, Philadelphia. Niner fans' favorite city, Philadelphia. He was there for 14 years, right? Kyle Shanahan going into his 7th year. So this idea, and it's not necessarily the hot seat conversation or whatever you want to call it, Andy Reid was there for 14 years before they said, you know what, man, we got to move forward. And then Andy Reid, but here's the thing. Here's a good question. Now, Donovan McNabb, obviously, Andy Reid had some really good QBs, I would argue better than what Kyle Shanahan has had so far. I don't know that it's really an argument, but Andy Reid, he did eventually need the future GOAT, as a lot of people would say, to get his, but he did get his.
Yeah, and that's where it becomes interesting with Shanahan because he doesn't have the future GOAT. Can he get it done with just an ordinary quarterback? This season will be an interesting one.